Good morning. Today we begin one of the most important chapter in our study of nutrition. In chapter 6, which is all about metabolism. So metabolism fueling the body. We will exploring how our body fuels itself, the complex, elegant, and essential process that our cells use to convert the food we eat into energy that keeps us alive. So, what is energy? On this slide, we have our formal definition. In the human body, energy is the power we derive from food, and its purpose is to perform cellular work. This work is not just about physical activity like running or jumping, it also includes all the vital physiological work you are doing right now, like breathing, your heart beating, and the constant maintenance and repair of your body tissue. So, energy exists in many forms, maybe chemical, mechanical, heat, and so on. A core concept in both physics and metabolism is that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It's, it is only transformed. So the body transforms chemical energy stored in food into the form cell can use. So our bodies are masters of this transformation. We take the chemical energy that is stored in our food and convert it into a form our cells can actually use to function. So, where exactly do we get this initial chemical energy from? So, let's look at the sources of this energy. Our cells get their energy by breaking the chemical bonds in macronutrients, and as we will discuss later, uh, maybe from alcohol also, we measure this energy in kilocalorie. It is absolutely critical to remember what can and cannot be utilized for energy. The only substances our cells can get energy from are 1. Carbohydrate, 2. Lipids, 3. Protein, and number 4. Alcohol. So, no energy is obtained from vitamins, minerals, or water. So, notice what is not on that list. Again, vitamins, minerals, and water. While they are absolutely essential for metabolism to happen, which we will see in a moment, they do not provide any calories or energy themselves. Now let's look at the sum of all these chemical reactions in the body, which we call energy metabolism. So, uh, energy metabolism is the sum of all chemical pathway in the body. These pathways do two main things. They break down molecules to release energy, and they use that energy to build new molecules. So these two opposing forces breaking down and building up are known as catabolism and anabolism. Catabolic or anabolic. So let's define those two terms more clearly on the next slides. Anabolism versus catabolism. This is the fundamental concept. First, we have catabolism. Think of catabolism as catastrophic or cleaving. These are all the metabolic pathway that break down large molecules into smaller ones. An example is the breakdown of glucose molecules or fatty acids or amino acids. This process releases energy. Some of that energy is captured, is usable chemical forms, and the rest is transformed into heat, which is what helps us maintain our normal body temperature. So this is regarding the catabolism. On the other side, we have anabolism. So these are pathways that build larger molecules from smaller ones. This is the opposite of the catabolism. Think of anabolic steroid. They build muscle. Example in nutrition include building glycogen from single glucose molecules or synthesizing a protein from amino acids. So anabolic reaction don't release energy. They require energy input. The energy they use is the energy that was supplied by catabolism. So in the next slides, I will show you the simple figure of that relationship. Uh, so this figure perfectly illustrates the cycle. On the left here, we see food macronutrients being breaking down by catabolic reaction. This breakdown release usable energy and heat, usable energy like here, and heat energy. The usable energy then fuels the anabolic reaction on the right figure here, which take small molecules and build them up into cell macromolecules like, for example, protein or stored glycogen. So now these reaction, catabolic reaction and anabolic reaction both don't just happen on their own. They need help. That help comes from enzymes or coenzymes. So the rules of enzymes and coenzymes. Nearly every chemical reaction in our cells requires specific enzymes. Why? To facilitate it or catalyze it. The enzyme act as helper to speed up the reaction, but the enzyme itself is not changed by the process. However, in most cases, these enzymes can't do their job alone. They need coenzyme, which are organic compounds that assist them. This is where vitamin become critical. Many of our B vitamin specifically thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, pantothenic acids, and vitamin B6, or called pyridoxine, serve as building blocks of these essential coenzymes used in energy metabolism. This is the answer to our question. B vitamins don't provide energy, but they are essential for the process of producing it. Let's look at exactly which B vitamin become which coenzyme. In this table is an excellent summary. As you can see, thiamine is a component of thiamine pyrophosphate or TPP. Riboflavin is a component of flavine adenine dinucleotides, FAD. Niacin, a component of nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, or NAD, or sometimes we called NAD. Pantothenic acid is a component of coenzyme A, and vitamin B6 is a component of pyridoxal phosphate PLP. So we are going to see those coenzyme names, especially FAD, FAD, NAD, and AD, and coenzyme A, again and again throughout this chapter. Remember, without these B vitamin in the diet, we can't make these coenzymes, and energy metabolism grinds to a halt. This is why primary symptoms of B vitamin deficiency is fatigue. Let's focus on two of those coenzymes, NAD and FAD, and their specific role as energy shuttles. So, in metabolism, energy is transferred in the form of high energy electrons. These electrons are negatively charged. So they are usually accompanied by positive hydrogen ion, like here, positive hydrogen ion or H plus. So NAD plus nicotine adenine dinucleotide and FAD are two primary coenzymes that acts as taxis or shuttles of these electron and hydrogen. So NAD, NAD plus, which contains niacin, can pick up two electrons and two hydrogen ion become NADH. So pick two electrons and two hydrogen to become NADH. Similarly, FAD or FAD, which contains riboflavin, also picks two electrons and two hydrogen and becoming FADH2. Their whole job is to pick up these high energy electrons from the breakdown of food and shuttle them to another part of the cell where their energy can be captured. We will see exactly where they go later on. But what is this energy being used to build? It's being used to create the cell's main energy currency, a molecule called ATP, or adenine triphosphate. So this is the most important molecule, adenine triphosphate or ATP. because this is a short term energy, the ATP. ATP or adenosine triphosphate is the energy currency of the cell. Just like you use money to pay of goods and services, a cell use ATP to pay for all the work it needs to do. So ATP made of adenosine molecules bound to three phosphate groups. The magic is the bonds between those last two phosphate. They are high energy bonds. When an enzyme breaks that last bonds, a burst of energy released, which the cell can then use to power an anabolic reaction, like building a protein. When ATP loses that last phosphate, it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So let's look at that the next slide. The ATP cycle. When ATP is broken down to ADP and an inorganic phosphate, energy is released for cellular work. The reserve reaction is called phosphorylation. Phosphorylation. So the phosphorylation, anabolic reaction that attach a phosphate group back into ADP to reform ATP. The reserve reaction is called again phosphorylation. This is an anabolic reaction that attach that phosphate group back into ADP to reform ATP. This reaction is not free. It requires an input of energy. So where does that energy come from? It comes from catabolism. Yes, the breakdown of the food we eat. So this is the central loop. We break down food catabolism to get energy to recharge ADP to become into ATP. Then we break down the ATP to release energy to pay for the other cellular work, the anabolism. Now, where does the majority of this ATP recharging happens? It happens in a specific part of the cell, mitochondria. Yes, the mitochondria, which you have properly heard called the powerhouse of the cell. These are the organelles that synthesized the vast majority of the ATP our cells need to function. They are primary site for catabolizing our macronutrient to transfer that energy to ATP. It is important to note, however, that not all energy metabolism happens here in the mitochondria. The very first stage of glucose breakdown, a process called glycolysis, actually occurs in the cytoplasm, which is the jelly like substances outside the mitochondria. This distinction between the cytoplasm and the mitochondria is key to understanding the two main types of metabolism, anaerobic and aerobic. So, aerobic versus anaerobic metabolism. The aerobic metabolism is what happens when oxygen is present. With oxygen, the mitochondria can do their job and produce lots, lots of ATP. This is the highly efficient process that fuels our bodies most of the time, especially during sustained activity. Uh, on the other hand, anaerobic metabolism is what the cell resort to when it doesn't require oxygen or when the oxygen supply is inadequate. This pathway happens in the cytoplasm, not the mitochondria. It's much less efficient and produces only a tiny amount of ATP. As such, it can only be maintained for a short period. Think of an all-out sprint. Let's start by looking at the breakdown of our primary fuel, carbohydrate, beginning with that anaerobic process in the cytoplasm. So, phase 1 is glycolysis. The first phase of glucose catabolism is called glycolysis, which literally means glucose splitting, or glyco for glucose, lysis for breaking down. As this slide says, this is an aerobic pathway, meaning it doesn't require oxygen and it occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. The process is simple. 1 6 carbon molecules of glucose is broken in half, forming 2 3 carbon molecules of pyruvate. So, one again, the process 1 6 carbon glucose molecule is broken down into 2 3 carbon pyruvate molecules, and the energy yields uses 2 ATP to start, form 4 ATP, net gain of 2 ATP also forms 2 NADH. So now let's look at the energy yield, which we call the net gain. So glycolysis actually uses 2 ATP to get started. It's like an investment, but in the process it generates 4 ATP. So 4 formed minus 2 use give us a net gain of only 2 ATP. As we said, it is not very efficient. It also forms two of those NAD energy shuttles. Now, the fate of those two pyruvate molecules depends entirely on one thing: is oxygen available or not? So, fate of pyruvate aerobic. When oxygen is available, pyruvate molecules enter the mitochondria. So let's look at the aerobic path first. So again, when oxygen is available, the two pyruvate molecules will move from the cytoplasm and enter the mitochondria. Inside the mitochondria, the 3 carbon pyruvate is converted into 2 carbon compounds called acetyl coenzyme A, or just acetyl Co A. This step is critical, as this slide indicates this reaction is irreversible. Acetyl Co A cannot be used to remake pyruvate. So this is often called the point of no return for glucose catabolism. From one glucose, we get two pyruvate. So we get two acetyl coenzyme A. But what happens if there is no oxygen? What is the anaerobic fate of pyruvate? So fate pyruvate or anaerobic, under anaerobic condition, like a muscle that's contracting so hard and fast that oxygen cannot be delivered quickly enough, that pyruvate has nowhere to go. It can't enter the mitochondria. Instead, to keep the glycolysis pathway running, the pyruvate is converted into another three carbon molecules called lactic acid, or that release H plus to form lactate. Lactic acid then quickly release a hydrogen ion and become its salt form lactate. So this is the compound that vigorously contracting muscles releases into the bloodstream. But that lactate is not just a waste product. The body has a clever way of recycling it using a process called the Cori cycle. The Cori cycle. The Cori cycle, as we see, the muscle, the muscle cell cannot do anything with that lactate, so they release it into the blood. The liver, however, can help. Liver cells are able to pick up the lactate from the bloodstream using special pathway called Cori cycle. The liver recycle that three carbon lactate back into a six carbon glucose molecules. And the liver then release this newly made glucose back into the bloodstream, where it's available to be used as fuel by the muscle or brain again. But as this is an inefficient process, remember, glycolysis only gain 2 ATP. The Cori cycle costs that liver 6 ATP to remake that glucose. So this is not sustainable long-term solution, but it is a vital recycling pathway. Okay, let's go back the anaerobic pathway. We have made our acetyl coenzyme A. Where does it go next? It enters phase 2 of aerobic metabolism, the citric acid cycle. The citric acid cycle. So the phase 2 citric acid cycle. This cycle has several names you might hear. TCA cycle or Krebs cycle. So citric acid cycle, TCA cycle, or Krebs cycle. This is the second major phase of glucose catabolism. So first, the 2 carbon acetyl coenzyme A enter the cycle and binds to 4 carbon molecules called oxaloacetate. This forms of a 6 carbon molecules called citrate, which is where the cycle gets its name. Then enough complex complex series of reaction. This citrate molecules is broken down and carbon are released in the form of carbon dioxide CO2. This is the CO2 we breathe out. At the very end of the cycle, the 4 carbon oxaloacetate is reformed, ready to grab another acetyl coenzyme A and start the cycle all over again. But what the point of the cycle? It is not to make ATP directly. It only makes one. The most important products are the coenzyme NADH or and FADH2. The cycle main job is to strip high energy electrons from acetyl coenzyme A and load them into these shuttles. So I will I put I will put you in more details to facilitate these reaction. So in the next slide, I will show you the map of the full cycle. Here, here you can see this the full pathway. At the top here, step 1, acetyl coenzyme A enters and joins oxaloacetate to make citrate. So again, step 1, acetyl coenzyme A enter and join oxaloacetate to make citrate. As the cycle progresses, step 1, step 2, and 3, you can see it releasing carbon dioxide. Look at here, there's carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide here. So, most importantly, generating multiple NADH and FADH2. Yeah, NADH, and FADH2. So this happens twice for every one glucose molecules because one glucose gave us two acetyl coenzyme A. So now we have all these loaded energy shuttles, NADH and FADH2 from both glycolysis and the citric acid cycle. Where do they go? They all converge on the final phase, the phase 3 electron transport chain. So this is the final phase and the real payoff of aerobic metabolism. It all happens in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Here's the process. First, our shuttles NADH and FADH2 arrive at the chain and drop off their high energy electrons and hydrogen ions. Number 2, these electrons are then passed down a chain of enzymes like a current. Number 3, as the electrons are passed, energy is released. Number 4, this energy is captured to attach phosphate group back into ADP, forming ATP. This is where the vast majority of our ATP is made. Number 5, and finally, at the very end of the chain, what's final electron acceptor? It's oxygen. This is the entire reason we need to breathe. Oxygen grabs two hydrogen ions and the now low energy electrons to form water. This is metabolic water is the final harmless byproduct. So let's look at the figure that to be clear regarding electron transport chain. So this figure shows the process beautifully. Here in the figure A, you see NADH and FADH2 dropping off their electron at the start of the chain. In figure B, the electron move along the chain releasing energy. In figure C, you see the critical step and the critical final step. The oxygen combines with hydrogen to form water. And in figure D, you see the payoff. The energy released is used to power the synthesis of ATP from ADP. So let's uh, tally up the final score. How much ATP do we get from one molecule of glucose? So the final count varies slightly. This is because, as the slide notes, NADH and FADH2 drop their electron at different points in the chain. Each NADH molecules that drops of electron yields 2.5 ATP. Each FADH2, which drops its electron a bit later, yields about 1.5 ATP. When you up when you add up all the NADH and FADH2 from glycolysis and citric acid cycle plus the 2 ATP we got from glycolysis, the complete aerobic catabolism of one glucose molecules yields a grand total of about 30 to 32 molecules of ATP. So compare that the 2 ATP from anaerobic metabolism and you can see how powerful the aerobic pathway is. So the next slide provides a great summary of all three phases we just discussed. Here it is all in one picture. Phase 1. In the cytoplasm, glucose is broken down to pyruvate via glycolysis. This makes a little ATP. In the phase 2, in the mitochondria, pyruvate is converted to acetyl coenzyme A, which enters the citric acid cycle. This releases CO2 and makes a little more ATP. In phase 3, also in the mitochondria, the electron transport chain takes all the high energy electrons carried by NADH and FADH2 from the first two phases, combines them with oxygen, and the process generates the vast majority of our ATP and releases water. So now glucose is not the only carbohydrate we eat. What about other simple sugar like fructose and galactose? This will be discussed in the next part on the same chapter 6. So up to here, thank you for your attention and goodbye for the next part. See you later. Bye bye.